Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. Daniel here, and joined at the desk by the Will Smith hand to my Chris Rock's face, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh, not too much. Just living the dream. That's very apropos pair for you there.
Excited to have another episode of the Collision Live. It's storming over here by our studio, and it's crazy.
Hopefully we don't lose power.
Yeah, hopefully it's not a metaphor for our show, but a lot of stuff to talk about this week. A lot of stuff that we're, at least I'm excited to dig into pop culture stuff, kind of more general stuff. If you guys haven't joined us before, welcome to the Collision Live. I know we had Unstoppable Animals in the chat was saying that they're excited. Encourage you guys to share in the chat, share your comments, have a conversation with us as we kind of take a biblical worldview, kind of look at what's going on in culture today and how Christians can kind of be engaged and navigate it and contribute to it and all that fun stuff, and also just celebrate fun stuff that happens in pop culture because that's what we love. So let's jump. We're going to just jump right into this, our first segment of our show, like we always do with pop culture news. So it's actually kind of a busy week for pop culture stuff. A lot of stuff going on. The first thing that stood out to me, Minions, The Rise of Gru. The first trailer for the second Minions movie, which is a spin-off of the Despicable Me franchise. I don't know, they all have those yellow, kind of annoying Minion characters in them. As a father, I'm sure I will be going to this movie. This comes out July 1st. Hey, these movies are funny. The trailer looks funny, so I'm excited for that. And things that maybe aren't funny, maybe a little more tragic. Bruce Willis, classic actor for Die Hard, and he's been around doing a lot of stuff. Kind of shockingly announced his retirement this week from acting. He has aphasia, if I said that right, which is a language disorder that affects sort of his ability to expression and communication. So he's just not able to do it anymore. So there's been a lot of kind of tributes to him, coming out from across Hollywood. It's sort of a sad moment that we are a reminder that we are all mortal, even someone as tough and as Bruce Willis. Other news, the House of Dragon, they just announced the release of this show, which is August 21. This is the the spinoff of the Game of Thrones. I think like a prequel show. So that'll be coming out on HBO Max in August. Another show that I'm excited for, which I actually somehow didn't know that they were even making this thing. Fallout just announced that they cast sort of one of their lead actors in this, which is news in itself. But for me, I wasn't even aware they were making a Fallout TV show. This is Amazon making this, and this is based on a video game that I played back in college, which is just perfect for a TV show. So I'm definitely, I don't know when this thing's supposed to come out, but they're obviously moving forward with it. Excited for that. Kind of a crazy news, maybe pop culture adjacent. Elon Musk just bought over 9% stake in Twitter, which makes him the biggest shareholder on Twitter. He's been outspoken about sort of free speech and Twitter and all that stuff, and he has the money to put his money where his mouth is, and I guess he just decided to buy Twitter, which actually will be probably a big story. I think it's once we kind of understand more of how that all comes out. But probably the biggest story, at least I know the one that Sam is the most excited for. Spy Kids is getting a reboot. That is right, and not just like a half effort sort of thing. This is Robert Rodriguez, the original kind of director, writer. This is coming back to retell new stories in the Spy Kids franchise. So I know we're all excited for that. But that's all we got this week in pop culture news. So what about the new Spy Kids reboot are you most excited for?
Probably the gadgets, for sure, and all of the spying. That'll be awesome.
I remember, I don't know when those ones.
I think I do.
I remember seeing them in theaters and thinking it was like the coolest thing I ever wanted to be a Spy Kid.
I know. I was definitely not 20 at the time. I loved it when I was a kid.
And the funny thing is, like, Robert Rodriguez is like the guy who created this. Like he was the guy that like the showrunner for like the Book of Boba Fett. Like he's done like,
really?
So it's not like he's some like lame cheesy like. He's done all these like adult kind of more action serious stuff, and then he just does Spy Kids. Anything else though it's gonna stand out to you? For
I mean, you failed to mention the great and powerful Grammy Awards that happened over the weekend.
Maybe the most kind of culturally relevant thing we could do is just sort of ignore these Hollywood reward shows. I did forget. I saw that the Grammys were happening.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that they were happening so soon after like the Oscars, and then I just like totally forgot about them to add into our
Even
list.
after you stayed up late and watched
Yeah,
it all
even
live.
after who wore the outfit best? What do you think of Justin Bieber's oversized suit? So maybe next week we'll kind of do like a look back on the Grammys or music or I don't know. I personally just don't care.
I didn't even,
but I know it is a
completely didn't know
cultural
it
thing.
happened.
But there's too many of these shows, and I'm still burnt out from the Oscars.
Yeah, well, it is just sad about because I saw that Bruce Willis had retired, and I didn't realize that it was because of aphasia, and so that's always sad to see. But yeah, a reminder that we're all human and all good things must come to an end.
Yeah, and then we can move on to our first topic. But even like some of the like Bruce Willis in the last couple of years has almost become like a joke. Like kind of like the Razzies, which is like the anti-Oscars, awarding like the worst movies and stuff. Like I think 2 years ago or a year ago, I created a topic, the Bruce Willis like category for bad movies, because he's been in so many things, and like it is sort of this like. Almost like now I feel like a total jerk. Like, people just didn't understand some of that stuff, or, why he was taking all these movies or some of that stuff. So it's a reminder, hey, have grace. Don't be too quick to cast.
I never played Fallout, so you'll have to school me in why I should be excited about that TV show.
Nuclear war aftermath, dystopian kind of weird world.
That sounds awesome.
But it is definitely tailor-made for like a TV show. But let's jump into that first topic. This is something that I kind of an area that I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks. I wrote an article on this, which I encourage you to check out. Kind of about what should the Christian home be? Should it be a like a safe space, or should it be like a training ground? How do we navigate some of that? So that we could get into that on the show, and kind of this broadly kind of the question, like are Christian kids too sheltered? Are we kind of as the church, like are we too concerned about protecting them from any exposure to the world and bad movies and Disney and all that stuff? Like, are we going too far that extreme? Like, how should we equip them to be able to handle these issues? It's a big topic, but lots to talk about.
Yeah.
Why don't you get us started? Like, what do you think? Like, what with that? Like, how do we navigate some of those issues?
Yeah, well, it's tough to say. Like, as the church, are they too sheltered? Like, in regards to sort of how the church at large is handling it, I would say maybe I would maybe frame it as maybe there's a lack of equipping kids today to actually think about some of these things. And so I think maybe it's just sort of, it's not like necessarily the church is trying to shelter kids, although I think they are, but maybe just sort of avoiding it altogether. And we've talked about this some before. This is maybe slightly adjacent to your article, but I think that oftentimes the church is just not helping Christian kids and teens sort of navigate some of the cultural norms and sort of what's happening in culture, and so they just sort of ignore it. And so like your brother Mike says, like the church is really good at providing answers to questions that nobody's asking. And so I think in that regard, I think there is some work that can be done.
Yeah, and I don't think it's like, to say, we're just sheltering our kids too much. Like, I don't think it's like out of like bad motives. And like, we're both parents, so we know, as with young kids, like I'm way more like alert to like what's in like cartoon movies and stuff than I maybe was 10 years ago because of that. But the verse that I've come back to a lot, just sort of in cultural issues in general, is Matthew 10:16, where it says, "I'm sending," Jesus talking about his followers, to his followers, says, "I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves." And to me, that's sort of like, although he wasn't talking about like, how to navigate Hollywood entertainment, like, but that verse and kind of like that command kind of summarizes a lot of that struggle of like, it is a world, of wolves. Like there's tons of stuff. There's definitely stuff that like as Christians and as parents and as the church, like that we should be alert and aware of. So sort of what's the solution to that? And it says, to be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves, kind of like, to be holy, to be innocent, but like also to be alert and engaged and like able to distinguish and discern. And I don't know, at least to me, it seems like, especially as like parents or kind of as homes, like we tend to veer very much towards the innocent as doves,
Yeah.
and then kind of not the like shrewd as snakes, or like being able to think through it. Like, is that?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably right on as far as most Christian homes go. I think the tendency is definitely to sort of err on the side of caution and maybe overprotect or over insulate our kids. And I think that I think it comes from a good place, and it's very easy to see why that is. But again, like I think what you don't want to end up with is doves that have aren't shrewd at all and sort of get eaten alive once they do eventually leave the home. And I think that's sort of your point in the article that you wrote as well, is that these kids are eventually going to grow up and leave the home, and so like they need to be prepared for that. And that's sort of ultimately what you're doing as parents, is preparing your kids to be adults and contributing members of society.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we review movies here at the Collision. Like one of the comments that we get a lot for different movies and stuff is like sort of the concern that this movie is planting seeds. Like whenever there's a movie that like our review for Dune, which kind of had some like mystical religious sort of stuff, or definitely Turning Red, which had like a different kind of cultural religion and some stuff. And like one of like the go-to comments is always like, it's this movie is planting seeds, and this is. And I think there is definitely truth to that. Like, we are impacted by movies, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. But I don't know. To me, it's almost like we overestimate like just how powerful. Like, like I think the goal is like, for me as a parent, is like to like work on like the soil so that these seeds, that the good ones, the healthy kind of biblical beliefs kind of grow, and that things like a Disney movie like doesn't take root. And like I don't know if it, this is speaking it personally as a parent, like, if like seeing a Disney movie or like a cartoon movie that like showed like more of like a pantheistic religion or something, like if seeing that for like an hour is like enough to like wash out everything I've like, been trying to instill in my kids for years, like then like, I don't think the problem's the movie. Like I think like my kids, I would hope that like my kids have enough of like a strong biblical foundation to like withstand. Doesn't mean you don't like talk with them through it and like help them process it, but like I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you've got bigger issues if like a 1 hour or 2 hour movie, could potentially derail your kids, just over some use of fantasy or something. But I think on the other hand too, just a 1 hour movie or a 2 hour movie from Disney is likely to be like many hours, because as I've discovered with many of the princess movies on Disney, my 3-year-old daughter will watch that constantly if given the opportunity. And so there is some sort of repetition that goes in, especially for young kids. They just...
Give me a ballpark Encanto. Encanto. How many...
Oh, yeah. Well...
Like, are you in the double digits for how many times you've seen that now?
Oh, yeah. Oh, easily. I mean, if not triple. But yeah, it's definitely been on a heavy rotation in the Camp household. So, and I think the thing too is like, that's a really fun movie. It's got magic in it, and it's like there's a magical candle, but like I have yet to see Claire sort of try and turn one of our candles into magic, or like believe in sort of this magic fairy. More, it's just she loves singing the song, and like every once in a while she'll just start singing "We Don't Talk About Bruno," and it's cute and it's fun, and it's more, I think, about that aspect of it, the family aspect of it, than sort of she's like suddenly really interested in witchcraft and like, how can I find a magic candle?
Like, and I think maybe we underestimate like how much children with guidance like can like distinguish truth and fiction, because like like my kids, when they watch like Winnie the Pooh, like they don't go to the zoo and like expect the animals to talk to them, or like there's things like that's how even like things like some like magic and stuff in shows, like like I think there's some that are very kind of grounded in like real world stuff, which is more problematic, but the more like kind of fairy godmother type magic, like my kids never, even at like a young age, never expected that was in any way like, like that our car would turn into like a pumpkin, like. And I do think there's like maybe because there is those two sides. Like we are called to be holy, and I think that, at least to me, like I distinguish between like like watching a movie that's just filled with like nudity and sex and like even just really heavy needless profanity or like real gory like gratuitous violence, like to me that's not like well, it's just fiction. Like that's like almost like vicariously just sinning through
Right.
media. Like that's different to me than like, hey, this is a worldview or a religion or something that
Yeah.
like that isn't biblical, and like is another way that people think in the world, and like we can engage with that. Like to me, it's not a sin for like a child to be exposed to like that there are other religions in the world, and like
Yeah.
they should learn to distinguish between that.
Yeah, and I think, I think as parents, we have to distinguish between like sort of what are the tools that are being used to tell this story, like what is the point of this movie or show, and so like are they using magic to get at a more like universal truth, or are they using it to sort of turn kids into little brats or something? Like what is the purpose of sort of creating this fantasy world or using magic or whatever it may be? Like how is that being used, and what is the sort of that driving the characters in the story to do, versus like separating that from like is this movie about sort of trying to just follow your heart and like don't listen to people around you and just stay true to yourself? Like, is that what it's trying to do, or is it trying to show something else? So like I think oftentimes we see like, oh, it's the use of magic or fantasy and that's the bad thing, but it's like, no, actually it's using that to tell like a really important truth about being a human and living in the world, versus like I think we sort of sometimes forget like what is it actually teaching. And so if there is no magic but it's teaching a bad, not a good worldview.
The likeliness of like a child, like, becoming like a Wiccan 20 years later because they saw like a fairy godmother is very unlikely.
That seed was planted.
That seed was planted. But I think like, the very like individualistic kind of self-centered mindset and worldview of a lot of these films, like that is more likely to actually like that. To me, that's far more dangerous of like a thing to like help them guide through than like, expecting a kid to like try and embrace some, they'll learn pretty quick that they can't shoot fireballs out of the stick they picked up on the side of the road, but like, how they live and how they kind of, the very kind of self-centered mindset. And we'll move on to the next section in just a moment, but another verse that I pulled out for the article, which I think speaks to this, Romans 12:2. It says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." And I like that because I think as soon as we focus on the first part of that, like, don't conform, don't, get out of the world, don't be like the world. But like, the second part of that is like the way you don't conform is that you allow God and to like kind of transform your mind so that you can engage and discern and, say this isn't true, this isn't biblical. Like, he's not saying like, don't be in the world. He's saying like be in the world, but learn to process it. And I don't know if it just seems as Christians we take the first part of that and it's like the way we don't conform is to like just pretend like the world's not out there. And I think that's why you see so many like young people like after high school and stuff, like it's like the first time they've been exposed to the fact that like people don't all think like a biblical worldview.
Yeah. And I would think too, like as hard as it would be, like I'd much rather, my kids be exposed to things when they're still living at home, so that like, and still have a good relationship with me, so that like we can talk through that at a young age, rather than like they get blindsided by something, in college or beyond. And now they're less likely to come to me and, talk through something. And so I think as hard as it is, and as difficult as it is, I think it's probably better for it to happen early. And as a parent who is relatively new in this space, like not having the answers, but at least the way I'm thinking about it seems like that would be a much better result, so that I have more control over the situation and we can talk through things at home before it's like, all right, off they go. And suddenly it's like, oh, all this stuff that like they've never even like seen or heard, and it can be sort of overwhelming and just disorienting And so I think I'd rather take it a little by little as they're growing up and sort of help them navigate.
Yeah,
that.
kind of while we before they get to like a college dorm, and like my first semester in college, I had this big bearded it was a class, the history of European thought, and he's this like angry atheist, and like the history apparently was just why religion is the worst, and like, from every angle, and like, this guy could quote the Bible, he's persuasive, like. And like even me that grew up in a house that was more of like a training ground, like a lot of these things like I'd never heard of. And so I do think like starting young, like my kids talk about like false gods, like, they've seen enough, like, Ray and the Last Dragon, like, all these kind of cartoon movies. And like, they know that they're people that don't believe in, the biblical God. And like, I think it's healthy for them to, not that I pull out like my, world religions, PhD textbook and like walk them through all the reasons, but just starting kind of training that young. So that's I know it's can be a touchy subject. Obviously we're not here to like, cast blame or, how dare you shelter the kids. But I do think, kind of as the church, we need to be aware and intentional that we're not just kind of protecting innocent as dove kids, but we're also like training them to be able to discern kind of truth from falsehood and not be, not give too much power, I guess, to like entertainment that like, if a kid sees it, then like, game over, man. Like you.
Well, and I think it's sort of the same argument that like violent video games make violent people, and it's like, well, like if you look at it, that's actually like there's lots of people who've played violent video games who don't go on killing sprees. In fact, the vast majority of people who play them don't, and so I think it's sort of we can tend to overemphasize, I think, certain aspects of entertainment and then underemphasize others, and so just keeping that balance.
Yeah, and speaking of emphasizing things, and I don't think something that can be overemphasized, we have our next segment of our show, which is Host Corner. So I'm going to introduce you guys to something that very likely will change your life, change your outlook. I have a reputation for these host corners that all I ever do is talk about metal. It's not true. I've talked about other stuff, movies. But I thought, hey, that is my thing. It's been a while. So I'm going to talk about metal, and not just regular metal, not like symphonic metal or just like power metal or European versus American thrash metal, but Dwarven metal. This is an actual thing. Here you can see the screenshot if you're watching the live stream. These are guys that dress up as like Lord of the Rings dwarves, axes and armor and all, and every one of their songs is about being a dwarf. Some of their profound kind of meaningful lyrics, like "I am a dwarf digging a hole, diggy diggy hole, diggy diggy hole." One of their hit songs that very catchy. Me and my kids rock out to that. So if you ever wanted just to be get out of the monotony of your day and be transported off to the misty mountains and experience sort of some what it's like to be a dwarf, check it out. Windrose is the name of the band. They got a new album coming out in just 2 months. Definitely excited for that. So if you're just gonna have that dwarven metal itch that needs to be scratched, definitely it's worth scratching. So Sam, are you a dwarven metal guy? Or
that's an itch I didn't know I had. So thank you for broadening our horizons here and yet another metal category that you have introduced here on the show. And
the best part, I'm a complete metalhead with a very narrow musical range of taste, but I am all about these like cheesy gimmicky bands that play it completely straight. Like, like they embrace hard.
Props to them.
Props to them. So Windrose, check it out. Got their new CD coming out. I forget where they're from. They're from some like Scandinavian country somewhere. But
I'm sure I'll have that on repeat for the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, so. I'll text you songs all week. But so jumping to our next topic. Speaking of kind of strange pop culture things that came out, Morbius was just released to theaters last weekend, and oh boy, this is definitely a movie. I did a review for it. Hopefully seeing the movie so that you don't have to. This is it was a horrible movie, but I encourage you to still check out the review and see why it was a horrible movie. But I thought we kind of talk about this because if you're not familiar with the movie, this is like Morbius is a Spider-Man villain. So this is sort of another one of these, which there seems to be a lot of lately of like
which I didn't. Has Morbius showed up in any of the Spider-Man movies to this point?
No, I don't. Okay. I don't know if they're. It seems like they're trying to like set up to, and it's if
coming soon. Yeah, Spider-Verse near you.
Yeah, the Spider, and it's a weird thing where like Sony Studios own Spider-Man, but Marvel and like Disney. So this is like the Sony side of it. So it's not really the MCU, but it is, and it's all confusing.
Sort of crossover.
So they're trying to kind of set up their own, like, almost like a reverse Avengers, where all like the bad guys and like Venom and some of these characters. But there's been sort of this trend of like, I don't know if we've like gone through all the heroes and now it's like, I guess now we got to tell stories about bad guys. Morbius, obviously Joker, and whenever that was, 2019. Venom kind of falls in that category. Cruella, telling, or like, what's the Maleficent, like, even some of the Disney ones that is like, hey, we don't need the princess, we just need the, the dark witch character.
We just need the evil stepmother.
So it's sort of been this like trend, and again, this is even a little different than than an anti-hero, because like Batman's an anti-hero, maybe, like, but he's like, he leans hero. He's still a good guy. He's just like a flawed. Where kind of the villain-centric stories are more of like, they're not an anti-hero. Like they're a villain. Like they're just the bad guy. So that we kind of get into that a little bit of, what do we do with these stories? It seems to be, not like every movie is about villains, but there's been definitely like a shift towards like more of these sort of stories and like finding out where the bad guys came from. Like, sort of as Christians, like I know we've talked about on the show about like anti-heroes and stuff. Like, is there value in these? Like, is it wrong that now we're just focused on like evil characters? Like,
I don't think so. I mean, I think there can be great value in it. Like, I think if you go back to the 3-part series exploring the depths of Darth Vader, known as the prequels, you'll see, how Darth Vader becomes Darth Vader, I think is interesting.
Some would say interesting.
Despite the flawed medium that was used to do it. But no, I think it is good. And I think like a movie like, I think The Joker maybe is a great example of like sort of exploring, how someone so diabolical comes to be. And I think if done in a way that sort of maybe helps the audience sort of see the humanity in this character, and also maybe see part of themselves in that character, to see how, you too could become a villain, and if it's not for these, certain choices that they make, and, that could have been a very different path, but they, close themselves off to that possibility. And so I think it's really interesting to people, and I think that's why you're seeing sort of this rash of villain movies come out. But I think also it can be done in a way that's just sort of like glorifying a villain, and I think if you do that, then I don't think it's going to be, one, a successful movie, and two, interesting to watch. And if you sort of strip away what most people can relate to, then people just aren't going to want to watch the film.
I think there is like a key difference between like exploring evil and like looking at like the roots of evil and like, just sort of what evil is and like the consequences of evil, and like that on one side, and like on the other side, it's like glorifying evil,
right?
Like, where we just sort of embrace it, and like, it's very, shiny and like almost like, endorsed. Like, isn't it cool to be bad? Like, sort of that mindset, I think, as a Christian is, not that those stories still can't work in some situations, but like, I don't know, I find those a little more of like, we got to be cautious about just like, reveling in, we're just, we're just go get entertained by just pure evil, as opposed to just like, hey, here's evil, and like it's like kind of suitably tragic, and like it's not saying, like, hey, everyone should go be the Joker now. Like, it's saying like, here's sort of the, the breakdown of society and of this person, and like, it's just looking at evil themes. Like, to me, like that is, like looking at evil characters, like the consequences of evil is like very much a biblical, like, like there are probably more evil bad characters in the Bible than like there are good ones. Like,
I think so. And so I think it's very much a worthwhile endeavor. And again, I just think it goes back to sort of, I think it depends on how you portray it. And I think the successful ones sort of tap into something that everyone can relate to, and sort of, if you can see yourself, or at least a part of yourself reflected in that villain character, then I think that the film or show has sort of done a good job of sort of relating that, and I think it's important to see just how evil can be so corrupting and so detrimental, and also perhaps how easy it might be to sort of go in that direction as a person. I think those can be very powerful stories.
Because it almost goes back to, like, I don't know, we talked about this, a couple of weeks ago on the Collision Live, but like sort of this mindset that sometimes we have as Christians, where like we're wired to like, like when we make movies, it's always like a very redemptive story.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
You know, that's like the hero's a Christian, and the villain or like the other characters like who aren't a Christian become a Christian at the end.
Yeah,
and like,
yeah.
Sort of this mindset that like movies exist just to like give us role models and to show us heroes and like inspire us to live like these characters, which I think is just too narrow of a of a approach to movies. I think whatever just voted, there was just some in the movie thing like voted like The Godfather was like their highest rated movie. I know it gets voted oftentimes like the greatest movie ever made.
Yeah.
Like that whole movie is just about like a decent man that like just descends and like becomes the villain by the end. Like becomes like sort of this like mob boss thing. And I think there's value in that. Like there's in like exploring sin and exploring evil and like characters that don't make the right choices. Like, just because they're on screen doesn't mean that like a movie's like endorsing it or like, hey, go murder innocent people because this character on the screen did that. Like,
and I think that kind of goes back to sort of our first topic of sort of, helping our kids navigate movies and stuff. And I think if they only see, like, if you see movies as only a place to like view role models, then like your like scope of entertainment is going to just be vastly limited. But I think if you see movies as explorations of the human condition or just, different ways of living and different lifestyles and, different choices and the outcomes as more of a teaching tool, then I think, and most people and I think even kids will see the difference. And it's not just like, just because this person was doing this means that like, that's the right thing to do. And so I think it's far more beneficial to sort of explore all of those rather than just like, you can only watch a movie that like has the lead that I agree with or that like would take the path that I would take. And so like, I think it can be much a more well-rounded education for the kids if you want to think about it in those terms, even though that's not obviously the chief goal of movies. But I think again, you can sort of judge for yourself and open up those possibilities for people. And I think it's a much better way of doing it than just like, hoping your kid doesn't do it later on.
Yeah,
or something.
and I've said before too that like if the gospel is sort of like that's like the Christian, like that is sort of the Christian worldview. That's how we understand the reality. Like that, like the gospel is the cross and the resurrection. Like it's like the death and like the evil and like the sin and like but without either one of those, like you don't have the gospel. Like if there isn't the hope and the redemption, then it's just death that's wrong. But like if only you have everything's just redemption, like there's no such thing as evil and sin doesn't exist, like that's also a false gospel. And like not that a movie like Morbius or the Joker is like presenting should be like how we understand the gospel, but like but I think that same mindset of like as Christians, like we can explore both those sides. If all you ever do is just all I care about is villains and evil and darkness, like that's an issue. But like I think we can glean kind of wisdom and stuff from that. So let us know if we missed any. I was trying to think of even what some of like these stories are. I know there've been a bunch, but if there's any that I missed mentioning that have come out recently, let us know. And what do you gain from these sort of movies? Like obviously some of them are just bad movies, but like is there value in just sort of exploring evil characters doing evil things, or as Christians should we just sort of only fix our eyes on just sort of the more noble characters? I will say Monty in the chat commented, said metal is to Daniel as boats are to Sam,
which is funny. Like I don't see myself as a boat person, but I guess I have mentioned boats quite often on here, but like I don't know that I'm particularly like a
Are you still like dabbling in the boat stuff?
Guy?
Like you haven't
Well,
fully...
there's some cool boats out there. I'm not gonna lie, but I don't know. Like I don't know that I would say I'm a boat guy, but
like I feel like maybe you're like a 7 on a scale of 10 boat person, where I'm definitely like a
10 of 10 on
like
metal.
10, 11 out of 10 metal person. But hey, once you discovered metal, there's no need for other genres. But speaking of discovering things and new things and things that you should check out, this week at the Collision, encourage you guys to check it out. If you are just watching or listening to us, but didn't know that we have a website, thecollision.org, where we do a lot of kind of written articles, a lot of stuff based on things that we talk about in this show, but maybe kind of more in depth or more kind of spelled out. You can kind of work through. I got a couple new articles that are out. One, the article that kind of based on our first topic of the Christian home as a training ground, not just a safe space. That article is bringing in a lot of traction, a lot of discussion, which I'd love to see. It was actually picked up. Moody Radio did a segment on that article talking about it. So I love it. It's one of the cool things about writing is have people spawn discussion, not that we always have all the right answers. And we just posted one, Disconnectedly Connected, kind of a mouthful of a title, but just looking at
it's a good title though.
But it is a decent title. Looking at kind of this technology and the fact that the way we communicate actually impacts what we communicate. It shapes us, like Twitter and Instagram and live streams, and just sort of exploring a little bit just what does that mean for the church as we kind of with COVID and everything else have had to kind of go more digital and offer things more online. Like, what does that mean? Kind of trying to look into the future for that. Could you check out too? We got some movie reviews. Morbius, like I said, wasn't a great movie, but I think there's still some stuff to talk about. So check it out. We had a written review, we got a video review, and then Lost City and all those other movies that have come out recently. Encourage you to check those out. Anything else going on this week for?
I think that's it. It'll be interesting. I think we'll probably return to this topic of sort of the medium and the message and digital communication, because I was just with the whole Elon buying a stake in Twitter, and then also I was reading a bit about a new social media platform called Be Real that is sort of an anti-social media app that I think has some interesting promise to it.
I'm sold. Anti-social media, that sounds like my kind of thing. I just call that reading a book in my comfy chair is the way to go. And could you check, if this is your first time, join us next week. I know we got a lot of stuff coming up. I'm sure we'll talk about like magic and Harry Potter with the new movie Fantastic Beasts coming up. I'm sure that will be a fun topic to get into with people have a lot of opinions. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you haven't done so, subscribe to our channel, like our page, just join with what we're doing, become a collider. A lot of stuff coming up, especially as we move into the summer. So just love to have these conversations with you guys. Make sure you like the video. But most of all, guys, stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.